Do you have any advice that you would give to aspiring poets, the rising generation? So if it's, say, three
Yes.
pieces of advice.
Okay. Yes. Well, the first piece of advice I'd give the rising generation is one, read my short monthly poetry newsletter. It's free. And the first 12 editions will all contain one piece of advice at least on how to write great poetry. So
Mm-hmm.
subscribing to that newsletter is a really good thing for you to do because I'm giving some advice which I think is really profound. I strongly recommend you get into that newsletter, and you'll
Mm-hmm.
see regular drip of advice is really useful. Secondly, find a poetry role model, someone you aspire to be like, living or dead, and start the serious process of imitating him or her. Imitate, imitate, imitate. Till it gets out of you. There was a time when I was sounding like W.B. Yeats because Yeats was a huge influence on me. I was sounding like Hopkins because Hopkins was a huge, Jeremiah Hopkins, huge influence on me. So you have to kind of get into their work till you get out of their work and you find your own voice. But it's not an easy thing to do, but that is what you need to do. Find the role model. And the third piece of advice, which I think I'd give you, I think is really, really important and overlooked these days, is practice, practice, practice writing in iambic meter. 90% of all great poetry in the English language is written in this meter. And there are powerful reasons why. If you take my newsletter, you'll find out what those reasons are. But actual fact, all the great poetry, more or less, is written in iambic. So only a fool would ignore it. And the corollary of that advice is avoid free verse like the plague. Avoid free verse like the plague. Because if you know, one of the things about free verse you'll notice is nobody can quote it. So that's really a bad thing because we want poets to quote. And two, nobody can differentiate one person's writing from another. It's amorphous because there's no shape. Remember, what we want with poetry is beauty. And what is the characteristic of all beauty? It's form. The characteristic of all beauty is form. So if you're actually going to say, oh, well, I don't have a form, I'm just writing free, whatever comes to me, try building a house like that and making it beautiful. You just can't do it. So avoid it like the plague. Avoid it until you become as good as T.S. Eliot or as knowledgeable as Eliot. I'm not a huge Eliot fan, but he did produce some good stuff. But be fair, he spent a long time getting to the point where he could abandon the iambic.
Yeah, and the best free verse poets, they were steeped in the traditions and they did know what they were doing. Right.
Exactly.
I think Wallace Stevens is kind of the same thing.